Give information through the use of graphics. Graphics capable of being identified in 3 seconds or less. Since the time when we were little kids, we could read and interpret pictures easier than words. I mean, nobody's going to embarrass us and punish us for mispronouncing or misusing or misspelling a picture. After all, man's language came after images. The written word was developed long after pictures. We have a prior receptivity to pictures. It's obvious, then, that the understanding and the use and construction of graphics as they relate to video production is a very important step. Graphics, as we intend to use it here, covers the use of visuals in both pictures and words. But it's the proper selection and intensification of those materials, alone or in combinations on the television screen, that contribute to the visual persuasion of our audience. We know from experience that certain words can be selected which easily evoke emotional responses. The content of the message overshadows the printed word so much that this kind of word communication can hardly even be considered verbal. The words here evoke vivid visual images in our mind that enforces the emotional impact. And as we begin to feed in appropriate visual images along with the printed words, the original emotion is enhanced and strengthened by the images, and the word and the combined graphics seems to be in balance. Now, certainly it would be necessary that the spoken word, which often accompanies the video graphics, also reflect that emotional quality of the graphic, just as in the case of music, if the communication process is to continue to be enhanced. But let us deal here just with the images on the screen. Just as words evoke picture images, so pictures can bring up word associations. The same picture can seem appropriate with many different words, many emotional feelings, depending on the context in which it appears. But the emotional content of the printed word and the emotional content of the picture begins to blend and combine into a third emotional experience that is somehow more than just a simple combination. The feelings are no longer quite as balanced as before, and there are greater energies which begin to run through our responses. Still further shifts between word and picture create tensions which pull at us or can make us feel uneasy, shifts which even create discordant emotional responses. The choice and combination of word and picture then can be a powerful tool in this art of visual persuasion. And one must be aware that every viewer is sensitive to the mood or the impact of the graphic. They may not always realize their own feelings or even be consciously aware of them, but every human being will feel the effect. We can see now that the emotional content of the graphic derives from the intensification of the word combined with the picture. It's the proper selection of each that we must now begin to consider. As long as we keep in mind some of the simple limitations of the television system as it exists today. We must design our materials and our artwork, keeping in mind the aspect ratio, and the essential area, and the detail, and the size, and the contrast ratio of the television display system. The aspect ratio is the relationship of the width of the television screen to the height of the television screen. Because a television screen isn't square, you see, it's rectangular. So the 4:3 aspect ratio, which means that it's 4 units wide by 3 units high.
This 4:3, or more precisely 1:1.33 aspect ratio, is derived from the original 35mm motion picture format, designed at the turn of the century and adapted to the video display system. When we design materials such as art cards for television, they need to conform to the 4:3 aspect ratio. But the camera may need to recompose the card in order to balance the shot. If we consider the full screen here as the size of our art card, then the inner border would define the essential area, which is the area originally designed to be seen. The extra space around the essential area would define the bleed area. This extra card space should be at least 20% of that essential area to allow for the possible recomposition. At its best, the television transmission will also cause a loss of display of what the camera sees. So, whether we ever need the bleed area for recomposition, design the art card with the extra bleed area and shoot the essential area, expecting to lose at least 10% on each side of what the camera sees by the time the information is displayed.
Well, the printer's art allows the use of fine detail, like these early engravings. But our television tools are so crude and clumsy by comparison. Because unless the lettering, the design is kept simple and bold, they may not be clear to our viewer.
These examples of fine etchings illustrate the problem the television display system has resolving fine detail. Anyone sitting close to the TV may see this clearly, but not from any distance. And the camera may have an effectively high resolution, but most home receivers don't, and the few quality sets are seldom adjusted to their optimum.
See, here's a different style and type. You know, lettering should be quite clear and legible, even beyond a distance of 10 feet. Because our present television demands that lettering and illustration be kept simple and bold and free from all unnecessary detail. The size of lettering on an art card is another important aspect. It's difficult to say how large lettering should be because it depends on how close the camera is. But the relationship between character size and the screen area can be illustrated this way.
You'll notice there's a wide range of type styles on this poster. Readable sizes may range down to 1/30th of the screen size, as you can see, and others can't be read at all. But of course, if you sit close to the screen, you can read smaller words than if you move back 15 feet or more. So television research says as a guideline that the size of lettering should be at least 1/17th of the screen height, with no more than 25 words on the screen at one time. Now, obviously, these aren't absolutes, but it'll give you guidelines depending upon the use of your program and the quality of your tools.
There are other important considerations which deal with the emotional content of different kinds of lettering, different typefaces. This type style is a Megaron medium. Its straight, clean lines make it one of the most readable, no matter what size of type is used. This type style is Times bold. You'll often see this style on the headlines of newspapers. And some of the thin lines, however, used to make up some of these letters can make this type style a little bit difficult to read sometimes. This type style is Caslon open face. Notice the letters are formed with very thin lines, making it difficult to read in small point sizes or from any distance. And finally, there's a serif Gothic, and the letters are made up of medium weight lines. It makes it easier to read than styles made up of thick and thin lines. And the vertical lines of the letters also make it more readable than the slanting letters of an italic style. It's what they mean to us. It's the emotional content of the character. Is why we need to make them clear and large enough to read and experience in the first place. There's one more thing about the limitations of the television display system, and that's contrast. Contrast is the luminance ratio, or difference of brightness between two objects. For example, before a letter is legible, there must be enough contrast between the lettering and the background.
Color can sometimes fool us because two contrasting colors can have the same density on the grayscale. This red and black are clearly differentiated on a color monitor, but not so on black and white. This familiar old color blindness chart is a good illustration. These dots have equal luminance and different color, so your graphics should be tested on a black and white as well as a color monitor for readability, because the healthy human eye can differentiate a much wider range of values than the camera.
So the contrast and the color separation should be tested on the camera to assure that there's a proper separation between the lettering and the background.
Sometimes it's almost a shame to have to leave the quiet that still exists in America. A slower pace, a gentler time. Perhaps because it's easier to see the real quality of life when it isn't so cluttered up with all the packaging of today's commercial world. But even the occasional breath of fresh air helps to clear the mind. And we can step back from the hectic pace to make sure that we haven't lost the content out of the bottom of our package. It's the quiet which allows us to question, does the graphic communicate the idea to our audience? Because if it works, use it. But if not, or if it adds confusion, then we don't need it. Perhaps what we all do need is to take the moment of quiet within ourselves, wherever we are, so that we can listen to our intuition, which knows that it's best to keep it clean, and simple, and elegant.
But most of us still have a natural uncertainty to our own intuitive taste. With all our growth and sophistication, we have a long way to go towards independent thought. And yet at the heart of it, you know, given the choice, people will inevitably recognize the better quality. People know what is good, even if they don't know why. That brings us back once more to human intuition and to feeling, and to the content of what we have to communicate. Research can provide us with valuable information to aid us in our choice. But what we choose to communicate, and to a large part how we choose to go about communicating with visual graphics, is still largely a matter of intuition. It's one of the peculiarities of intuitive men and women that they are psychologically in tune with their fellow human beings around them. That doesn't leave us without a logical approach to graphic design for video. Because intuition may not be logical, but it is not unlogical. And there really are some guidelines as to the construction of form.
The best place to start is with composition. In graphics, this is to understand that composition is simply the arranging of all the elements of a picture so that the intended message is clearly visible. Composition can be defined by its content and its form. Now, the content is simply the physical object picture set against its background, or more simply, the ground. Which is the object and which is the ground can be confusing for the viewer, as in this classic example, if we fail to define the focus for the eye. This is easily illustrated when the object is a person or a building or even a landscape, but less easy to define quickly if the object is abstract, elements such as color and shape or interacting lines. But these too can be the object of the picture, and whether the object is physical or abstract, just how that object is presented in relationship to its ground is what we mean by form. And we utilize this to create the composition which will evoke the desired emotional response from the audience. Now, form in itself doesn't really have rules, but there are certain principles which can be observed in nature that one can apply. To begin with, the principle of thirds in all art forms observes that the focus of visual interest will be on or near the intersection of lines which divide the field of view, such as this TV screen or your camera monitor, into thirds, both vertically and horizontally. It is at these points that we should attempt to compose the object in relationship to the ground in order to elicit the strongest viewer response. Fundamental design theory defines this approach to offset placement of objects against ground as dynamic composition. Static composition, or composition at rest, under this theory places the object in the center of the frame, or balances the objects equally, an even balance that inhibits any flow of the eye. The fundamental design theory also states that central placement of your object may not only be uninteresting, but it can actually result in the objects receding from the viewer's point of focus and attention. Dynamic composition can often be more visually interesting, but it requires more practice to execute. And perhaps it will help to explore the basic elements that can be used to create a balanced dynamic composition. Consider balance by imagining a fulcrum in the center of the screen, and the objects of your composition as having weight in terms of their size and proximity to the camera. Two objects of equal weight, balanced equidistant from the edges of the frame, create a composition at rest. If the object on one side of the screen remains the same and the object on the other is enlarged by increasing its actual size or apparent size by bringing it closer to the camera, the composition becomes unbalanced. By placing the objects in relationship to a proper proportion of the ground, used as negative space, the balance becomes restored to the composition as dynamic composition. The amount of dynamics and the proper weight of the object on this balance can be created not only by the placement of objects in relationship to the ground, but in relation to contrast and shape and line. Lines create an eye flow, and care must be taken to direct the vision towards the object and not off the screen. The directional flow that the compositional lines induces begins to create emotions of its own, and there seems to be sufficient psychological evidence to state that certain lines and shapes and forms elicit universal responses. Horizontal lines seem to create a sense of restfulness and stability. Vertical lines suggest a warmth and sometimes even an aggressiveness, especially when intersecting with horizontal lines, which becomes a focal point for the viewer. Parallel vertical lines are orderly and symmetrical and create a sense of stateliness, and diagonals generate a sense of action. Shapes, as we said, conjure feelings as well. Squares can denote order and balance, and many squares need another means of visual interest to create a point of focus, and they're a good stage then for an on-camera narrator. Circles are aesthetically pleasing and suggest completeness or containment, and so are often used in framing. And triangles imply movement, and especially in nature, and carry the eye flow towards the apex. S-shapes and curves add a softness and generate a feeling of depth. Their lines create a slow, easy movement and can seem to pull the eye easily to the center of interest. Any shape or form can be used in the foreground to help balance the composition, whether by framing the object or in other ways leading the eye to the object. But foreground objects are still ground and must be judiciously used so as not to confuse the audience's focus of attention and pull the eye from the object. Implied movement uses our subject itself as the vehicle of eye flow towards negative space. And as long as the composition leads into this blank area of the ground, negative space becomes an active ingredient of the picture, not causing our eyes to leave the screen, but generating a greater sense of dynamics and interest. We've already showed the effectiveness of contrasting words and pictures to create a strong emotional response. Contrasting basic elements in color and texture and light will also generate strong interest. And here again we have to come back to understanding our choice of why texture over color. For contrasting light by combining soft or hard or rough or smooth maintains a unity if the color isn't contrasted, and this will result in obtaining the audience's attention and making them available to the content of our message. Contrasting color must be carefully handled as well as line and shape so that they don't lead to a disharmony and a confusion. In any one picture, the contrasting element should be limited to a very select few. The principles of the use of color are basic. Warm colors attract attention, especially yellow and red and orange, with yellow being the best choice on video. Cool colors, greens and blues, are calming and soothing, much less attention-getting, but they add a depth and a dimension. Large blocks of any color, as we said, will attract attention, and if they are used as backgrounds, have to be carefully composed so they don't pull the attention from the object. Many colors of the same intensity used together are usually ineffective, causing the eye to move about, searching for the center of interest. These basic principles of composition are only meant as a logical starting place for decisions that are much more intuitive than logical. For the real key to composition lies within each of us, our own awareness of the natural balance which exists in the world around us and how our eye and feelings respond to them. And we must train ourselves to look and perceive what's really there and not what we might wish to be or not to be there. Nature is the prime teacher in any art, but we must learn to discipline ourselves and to look and to see, to pause a moment more and make sure that the picture we mean to capture is the one that we have, and that there's no distracting or out-of-place elements in our frame.
You see, the final decision for the complex assembly of these emotionally important images still has to be made by being sensitive, in tune with our own artistic intuition.
All kinds of titles and lettering can be produced for compositing over video and film photography and illustrations, following these few quite simple rules for video reproduction of graphics. Remember the 3:4 aspect ratio, the simple, bold lettering, 1/17 of the screen height, no more than 25 words at one time, to match the content of the type style to the content of the message, to have good contrast between lettering and background. Now, any kind of titling can be generated in black and white or color through the use of many materials. Illustration boards can be combined with paste-ups made with construction paper of all colors to produce simple graphics. Hand lettering of all kinds can be produced from the most precise to the freest of hands. Whatever's appropriate, whatever works. Typewriter titles can often work well as long as the ribbon is of high quality and your camera can reproduce the words large enough to fill the screen. The capability to reverse key can disguise the simplicity of this method and produce clean, clear, readable graphics. Press-on lettering is a quick, effective method of generating titles for graphics, whether mounted on art cards or combined with a background or shot with a camera and simply edited between shots in the forms used by the old silent movies. Logos and other stylized characters may be generated through a process of photomechanical transfer, or PMT. The original artwork is shot by a film camera using high-contrast film, and the PMT, which is the slick black and white film copy of that artwork, is produced. PMTs can be cleanly reproduced by the video camera because of the 100% black and white levels of that reproduction. Of course, centering and keeping the words straight can be a time-consuming process while photographing graphic art cards. But if your system includes a switcher, a horizontal wipe or registration pattern can be generated to aid your eye. And an easy way to slightly straighten the graphics without trying to fudge the art card is to move your camera. If the art card runs uphill on the right, dolly the camera a bit to the right, or move it to the left if it's high on the left. And today's sophisticated character generators provide clear, legible characters, letters, and options such as multiple fonts and variable height and width characters, built-in colorizing, automatic centering of words and lines flashing, and a memory to store hundreds of pages of graphics. Designed like a typewriter, character generators are easy to operate and of great value when added to the editing system. The amount of type styles, effects, and pages of memory are proportionate to the price, of course, with a computerized art system at the top of the line. Utilizing electronic pen and paper to generate titles and illustrations, abstract forms and stylized figures, in a full palette of color, some can even reduce or enlarge words and pictures, negative or positive, solarize or colorize, and add edges and borders. But the Wurlitzer of today's video, with all the bells and whistles, is computer animation, which interfaces computer memory systems with the film and video cameras, allowing accurate compositing of animation and models and various background plates and live action into completed images. These tools can manufacture dazzling effects, producing lines and words and objects which appear to have three-dimensional characteristics, which move or can be formed on the screen. The cost of computer graphics is coming down rapidly, and like much of the electronic technology today, they'll soon be in common use wherever you live, wherever you work.
Now, with a new understanding of the elements which are used to generate video graphics, we can see wonderful examples every day on any television set. You'll see how identification can be elicited in seconds by a combination of things that we've discussed. The use of line which leads the eye to the logo, the use of bold, simple lettering, the contrast of object and ground, the consideration of aspect ratio, color, movement, the observation of minimum screen height combined with a simple typeface for clarity, with as few words as possible, and how all these elements combine even within the most straightforward and conservative announcements. For here the viewer is made receptive to the picture through the emotional tone of the voice. The construction of the setting matches the soothing, confidential, advisory, kind of friend-to-friend approach. The graphics are serious and conservative and solid, a no-nonsense complement to the advisory approach. And see how the unity of continuity holds the candle flame so that the final graphics may be incorporated around that flame. Graphics executed properly will add immeasurably to your program. It takes time to think about what you're trying to do. But the effort spent on that front-end planning will reward you with emotionally involving graphics in a program that will satisfy the needs of your sponsor.
Our tools today allow us great freedom. Freedom to play upon the emotions of our fellow human beings, to motivate them, to direct them. But there's a great deal of evidence to show that it's the nonverbal, the implied communication that's often the most effective, even more so than the logical and the lineal and the verbal communication. So it's important that we find the truth within ourselves, to listen to that inner voice, that intuition, to see that the direction in which we motivate people, the direction in which we move them, we're willing to take the responsibility for. So these video tools put in our hands a form of visual persuasion. But it's in our hearts that we'll find the content.